Did it work?
Yep.
There we go. Is it working now? Yes, there we go. It wasn't letting me move forward. All righty. Well, thanks everybody for having us here to our friends at the Diabetes Link. We're really excited to be here. Lee and I, we're going to give you like a little warning up front before our presentation. We had two very different roles in higher ed, which we'll explain in a second, but we approach this topic in very different ways. Lee's job is the administrator that is so excited to help your student, and I am the administrator who's excited to protect the institution and save the institution money. So I'm not as mean as I pretend to be, but we just want to give you like a real world sample of what you could hopefully not experience when you're thinking about sending your kid off to school or you're preparing to go this fall or whatever it may be. All right, so if you were to come to one of the CWD events, this event would be called Taking Diabetes to Campus. Um, and we'll kick it off. Oh, it's me first. Hello, I am Matt Point. I am the Director of Advancement and Programs at Children with Diabetes. I oversee all of our sponsorships, our relationships with partners like the Diabetes Link, and I oversee all of our conference programming and our external events, like our Friends for Life conference, which we'll talk about in a second. My connection to diabetes is my husband, Brian, who was diagnosed at 15, and he actually volunteers at Children with Diabetes and runs our teen program at all of our conferences. In a past life before CWD, I was in higher education administrator. I've been the director of residence life and housing and assistant dean of students at a few schools. Most of my experience revolves around the emergency on-call response on campus, housing, dining, so where you eat, where you sleep, and everything that has to do with outside of the classroom. So a lot of fun. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
Hey, everybody, I'm Lee. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad that you're here with us tonight. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Children with Diabetes as my profession. But before coming to CWD, I have worked in higher ed for about the last 28 years. I've had a variety of different roles. I've been a dean of students at 2 different institutions. I've worked in everything from academic advising, residence life, student conduct, student activities, to disability management. I worked for 14 years at Duke University and Duke University Health System as the executive director of their disability management system, where we oversaw all disability accommodations for students, faculty, staff, and visitors, both to the university and to all of our hospital systems as well. I now live in Wilmington, or outside of Wilmington, North Carolina. I've worked as the director of the Disability Resource Center at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and I've also served as the director of Title IX and Clery Compliance at UNC Wilmington, and still do that sort of on a consultation basis. My connection to diabetes is I have 14-year-old twins, Ava and Davis, and my daughter Ava was diagnosed with diabetes when she was 3 years old. My son Davis, of note, was diagnosed with autism when he was in the 3rd grade. So both of my kids have services through the education system in the K through 12 world. One has an IEP, one has a 504 plan. And on the day of Ava's diagnosis back in 2013, the first thing that I did after she was diagnosed with diabetes, as she was in DKA in the hospital, was to Google children with diabetes. And that was where I found CWD and how I became connected with this organization. So we're glad you're here with us tonight, and we look forward to sharing all of our expertise with you about taking diabetes to college campuses.
All right, and just to give you a little bit of background about who we are, Children with Diabetes, the organization, we started in 1995 as a website and a listserv. And back when the AOL chat rooms were really fun, parents were online in the middle of the night, checking blood sugars and chatting with each other as they were waiting for their kids to come back up or, come down, because it was pre-CGM and they were doing finger sticks. In 2000, somebody named Laura Bilodeau sent out an email to all of her imaginary internet friends and said, "My family's going to Disney World next summer. If you'd like to join me, please come." 550 people showed up in that first year, which is now turned into the world's largest consumer-facing event and patient event in type 1 diabetes, which is our annual conference, Friends for Life Orlando, which will take place this July 9th through 14th at Walt Disney World. children with diabetes is a bit of a misnomer for us. We are children with diabetes here, and when we go to other events, but in Orlando and at our conferences, we are Friends for Life because in 2023, 57% of the attendees with diabetes at Friends for Life Orlando were actually adults. And we have more than 200 attendees at Friends for Life that are young adults, 18 to 25 each year. So if you're interested in learning more, you can visit our website at ffl.is/Orlando to learn more about this year's event. Registration and the room block are open, and we hope you enjoy it. You join us, and you can get like Lee's fun mom session, or if you don't get enough of this today, you can hear it again in July.
So one of the things that I forgot to mention sort of in my background is I'm also an attorney. I had a small solo practice in Charleston, South Carolina, where I focused on education law, disability law, and domestic relations, primarily focusing on guardian ad litem work for children that were at risk. So what we want to do to you tonight during our time with you is to be able to help arm you with information about how to navigate the accommodation system in colleges and universities. So we're going to give you a brief overview of the relevant laws that pertain to higher ed and disability accommodations in the college environment. We're going to talk about the ADA, Section 504 of the Rehab Act, any sort of state and local regulations regarding service animals, and then Matt's going to talk about FERPA and Clery as well as those apply to the college environment that you're about to face whenever you get to college. So the first thing that I want to do is to address the elephant in our Zoom room tonight. I know that whenever we think about diabetes and whenever we look at things online in the diabetes online community, there may be this question of, is my child disabled because they have diabetes? And a lot of times parents will want to say, they're not disabled. We're not going to use that as a crutch for them to be able to get anything. They need to be able to go forward with their college environment, with their college plans without leaning on the diabetes. But what I want to tell you as your attorney for the next hour while we're here at this session is that diabetes is a disability under the ADA. So the definition of disability under the ADA is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. And when the ADA was originally passed in 1990, it really did protect individuals that had a very visible disability. So people that were deaf, people that were blind, people that were wheelchair users. When those individuals came into our offices on the higher education campuses, we were able to recognize that they had a disability and therefore they may need an accommodation to help level that playing field. But with 2008, Congress passed the ADA Amendments Act. And when they did that, they really expanded that definition of major life activity to include lots of different medical conditions and physical conditions like functions of the endocrine system. So whenever we see this debate of, is my child disabled or is my child not disabled? What I want to tell you tonight and to arm you with this information is, yes, they have a disability under the ADA. They are protected by a civil rights protection under the ADA. And the reason why they have that disability is because they have a physical impairment that substantially limits their endocrine system. So it's not that I'm telling you to be able to go out and to use this disability as a shield. You know, when we think about sort of using the word disability and asking for accommodations in the classroom or the workplace or beyond, we are thinking about using it as a sword. So there's two ways that you can look at the word disability: hiding behind a shield and sort of, you know, saying, I can't do that because I'm disabled. So the example that I could give you is, you know, if I tell my kids you need to take the trash out and they say, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm disabled. I'm not able to do that. What I can say to them is, no, you're going to take the trash out. We may need to be able to have an accommodation for you. If your blood sugar is high or low, we may be able to put that on pause, but you're still going to be able to take the trash out. We just need to level the playing field for you. So again, diabetes is a disability under the ADA. I want you to also think about whether your kids have additional things, or whether you as a young adult that are joining us here tonight, do you have additional issues that you may need to seek accommodations for? Do you have a learning disability? Do you have any sort of psychological issues where you also may want to be able to ask for an accommodations for those as well? Consider those. Food allergies, because all of those are things that you're going to want to bring to the disability office at your various college whenever you get ready to start this fall. An accommodation under the ADA and under Section 504 of the Rehab Act is a modification of a policy or a practice. That's as simple as it is. So whenever we think about accommodations in the college environment, we're thinking about things like housing accommodations, classroom accommodations, extracurricular accommodations, jobs or internships, or the clinical environment as well. But again, when we're asking for an accommodation because of the diabetes or because of any other disability, we're doing that because we're asking them to modify a policy or practice and to be able to allow your child or you as a young adult to be able to access the goods and services at your institution just like anybody else would without a disability. So there are some differences between high school and college accommodations. We had my daughter's 504 meeting yesterday, and one of the persons who was leading the 504 meeting from her high school said, so is it okay for us just to be able to sort of make a copy of an IEP plan or a 504 plan, give that to our graduating seniors, and let them take that to the college? And what I will say is that, yes, we will take that as sort of historical evidence that they have a disability, historical evidence that they have received accommodations in the past. But what we need to make sure that you do whenever you get ready to go to college is that you have documentation from your medical provider that is specific related to higher ed. For those of you that may have students that are first generation college students who have never experienced the college environment before, you may not even know what to ask for in terms of what type of accommodations need to be supported by your medical provider. And Matt and I are going to share with you some magic wish lists that we have tonight on these slides to be able to help you along with that process. But again, a few different differences between K through 12 environment and the college environment. Schools are not going to identify you as an individual with a disability. Even if they see your pump, even if they see your Omnipod on your arm, even if I recognize that you're somebody with diabetes, I still am not legally able to come up to you and say, hello, I work in the disability office. Let me be your professional diabetes mom while you're enrolled at my school. Register with my office. Because if I do that, then I am regarding you as an individual with a disability and I could possibly be discriminating against you. And that is not legal under the ADA or under Section 504 of the Rehab Act. So your students need to be able to self-identify as an individual with a disability and voluntarily go through our reasonable accommodation process. If you don't hear anything else that I say here tonight, I need you to pay attention to bullet number 3 on your slide and recognize that accommodations are not retroactive. So, if you have a child that is like my daughter who was diagnosed when she was 3, she is very accustomed to receiving accommodations, but she is now very self-sufficient in terms of the management of her diabetes. When she gets ready to go to college, she very well could come back and say to me as her parent or to the school, I don't need you. I can manage my diabetes on my own. There is no problem. I don't want to go register with this office. I have other things that I want to do once I get to college. And as a professional in higher education and working in the disability management world, where I see those students show up in my office is after midterm. They have had a situation to where they have missed tests, they've missed classes, they've bombed out their midterm, and it all may be absolutely related to the disability or to their health condition. And when they come into my office, what I'm able to say to them at that point is, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Let me help you through this reasonable accommodation process, but we are not able to go back. There are no takebacks with it because accommodations are not retroactive. So the very best thing that you can do is register with the disability office early on in your experience with the college environment, even if you never need them. Just make sure that your child is registered. So in the event that if there is a situation with DKA, if they are sick and they have to miss class, if they do happen to rip up their pump tubing when they're walking into one of their final exams, they're registered with the disability office and the disability office is able to help them in terms of potential accommodations that they may need. The magic formula for being able to seek accommodations in the college world is what I have on this last bullet on this slide. Accommodations are only going to be granted if they're necessary, reasonable, and appropriate. So I'm going to self-disclose to you tonight that I am an individual with a disability. I have a condition that is similar to MS. It's called transverse myelitis. It happened to me in my late 20s. I drive with hand controls. I have used a wheelchair on and off for the last probably 20 years now, and have, again, a mobility impairment that substantially affects my major life activity of walking. So if I went to our boss at CWD and I said, you are sending me too many HR documents to read, and you are sending me too many legal documents for me to be able to read. I'm really tired of reading these things. Could you get me a qualified reader to be able to come here to my home office, sit beside me, and I'm going to lean back in my chair and just listen to the qualified reader read me all of these documents that you're sending me because I have a disability? That likely would not be necessary, reasonable, and appropriate for an individual that has a problem walking. Now, if I would come to my boss and I would say, I need an accommodation in terms of parking. I need to be able to park close to my building. I need to be able to park at the end of a parking row. That might be likely reasonable based upon somebody who has a physical condition with walking. So again, when you're thinking about what is the ask to colleges and universities, you want to make sure that you're asking for things that are necessary, reasonable, and appropriate based upon your diabetes or whatever other medical condition that you're seeking accommodations for.
One thing that's unique, or something to keep in mind about what can be deemed as necessary, reasonable, and appropriate is that those qualifiers can be applied differently at different institutions. So, what might be reasonable at Duke may not be reasonable at Moore College of Art and Design. A good example of that is we had a building that was over 100 years old in a historic section of Center City, Philadelphia. It was inaccessible to anyone in a wheelchair. We weren't allowed for the historical society to put in a ramp out front. As such, anyone in a wheelchair couldn't access the building. So an accommodation to be able to take in a class in there looked a little different because we actually moved a class from one building into another to make sure that a student could participate in it. However, the accommodation wasn't to create a way for the student to get into that building. We always like to point that out because one thing that we hear from parents is like, hey, my friend's daughter has type 1. She went to Penn State, and now my daughter's going to Carnegie Mellon, and they are not giving her X, Y, and Z that my daughter got up at Penn State. What should my friend's daughter got at Penn State. What should I do? And I'm like, maybe it doesn't work the same way. Maybe they don't have the same type of facilities. So it really just depends on the situation, and that level of necessary, reasonable, and appropriate can be applied differently based on every institution, what they feel like may fit into what they have in their resources. Maybe they could do it and they say it's unreasonable request because of the cost for what the institution may be able to support, but a wealthier institution with may have a donor who could cover it or have more resources to cover that accommodation. So it's can be a touchy subject for some people, so we always like to point that out.
So if you were going to take a picture of anything on our slides tonight, this is what I would want you to take a picture of. So if I was sending my child to college, which I will be in a few years, this is the wish list that I would have with the words that I would use when requesting accommodations in the college environment for someone with diabetes. And so I'm going to go over those with you so you can sort of understand the difference between the K through 12 environment and the college environment. I would ask for rest breaks without penalty during exams and tests. So what this may look like to you in your K through 12 world might be extended time on examinations. So when we did Ava's 504 plan yesterday, she has time and a half on exams in the K through 12 world. The reason why in the college world you want this extended time or these rest breaks is because you don't know what diabetes is going to do to you before you get ready to have an exam or a test. I talked about before just a minute ago what happens if you walk in and the pump tubing gets caught. What happens if your pod gets ripped off and you have a bleeder and you need to be able to fix that? What happens if you're high or low and you need to be able to drink a juice box or eat some nerd clusters that our colleagues eat? What if you need to be able to deal with the diabetes? You should not be penalized for the diabetes whenever you're thinking about the college environment and your testing and your performance there. So I would ask for rest breaks without penalty during exams and tests, which basically means for you to be able to stop the clock where you're being timed, deal with the diabetes, and then get back in there for the test like the rest of the classmates. I would ask for testing in a minimally distracting environment, and that is not because you're distracted. I told you that my son has autism, he has ADHD, he has auditory processing disorder. If he would hear this, during the middle of an exam, that would very much likely sort of distract him from being able to complete that test. In the diabetes world, when we're thinking about testing in a minimally distracting environment, it's because of the beeping or the vibrating or because of the pump noises that your child may make whenever they're taking an exam. So really, when you're asking for this minimally distracting environment, you're asking for that so that way they're not distracting the other test takers at the same time. Permission to keep your electronic devices with you at all time. It is very important for you to try to sort of explain to people in the disability office and instructors that this thing right here that you're seeing in front of me, which is my phone, this is a medical device. And as we think about technology in the diabetes world changing, and we think about Tandem's Mobi, which is completely operated by your phone, it's going to be very important for you to be able to have your electronic devices with you at all times. A word of caution about that, though, would be in terms of things that are like credentialing exams like the LSAT. You may be dealing with this with the SAT and the ACT or the GRE. Having it with you at all times may not mean that I have it in my pocket or I have it in my back pocket or I have it right here beside me. It may mean that I have it in the testing room with me on the proctor's desk. And again, that would be reasonable and appropriate. You could turn the alarms on to that way where your student is able to be able to listen to it. They can still be within the presence and with the reading meter of that phone, but you need to make sure that you ask for permission for you to be able to keep that with you at all times. Permission to use the restroom as needed. One way that this may also work would be preferential seating. A lot of times in the college environment, they do not have assigned seating, but maybe you're in a lab environment, maybe you're sort of in a computer environment where they have assigned you to a seat. Because of the diabetes, maybe you're high and you need to be able to use the restroom a lot. Maybe you need to step out. So you may ask for a preferential seating to be able to sit closest to the door. That would be something that would be necessary, reasonable, and appropriate based upon the diabetes. Permission to be able to treat a high or low blood sugar, and especially back when we were in the COVID days when people were being able to wear masks. We wanted to make sure that people were able to remove a mask. If you're in the clinical environment, maybe you're a health science major and you're doing a nursing rotation and you're in a hospital and you have to wear a mask at all times. You want to make sure that you have permission to be able to remove that mask and treat your high or low blood sugar in any location at any time. And that also means permission for you to be able to keep your snacks or your low treatments with you at all times as well. And again, focusing on the necessary, reasonable, and appropriate. That does not mean that you necessarily need to be able to have a cooler with you to where you pull out a full buffet to be able to treat your low blood sugar, when you're on the workplace and when you're in an internship environment. It just may mean that you need to be able to have, a juice box with you or your gummies or something like that, and not be penalized for that in any sort of way. Priority registration, I think, is important because you know your body as a young adult. You know whether you're normally low in the morning, whether you're high at night. You're going to know, sort of what your best environment is for you to be able to get optimal performance whenever you're in the classroom environment. So priority registration, maybe you want to be able to make sure that you have breaks between your classes. Maybe you want to make sure that you have lunch every day at 12 o'clock, like our friend Ashlyn. So we want to make sure that we schedule our classes and we schedule our break time to be able to meet the needs of our diabetes. Now, priority registration does not mean as a freshman that you get to jump in front of all of the seniors and get the classes that they want first, because they have sort of earned their way as a senior. But priority registration may mean bumping you to the front of the registration queue in your own particular registration class. And the last one that I have on my magic wish list is housing accommodations. I think that it's important for you to be able to think about this and think about it for a long time about whether you want to, do you want to ask for a single room? Do you want to ask for a roommate? What Matt and I can tell you is that there will never be a time in all of higher education where we assign a person to you as an accommodation. Matt and I are best friends. This is a true story. If we were going to college together and I had diabetes and I went into the disability office and said, I'm registering for my accommodations, and one of my accommodations is I want to make sure that I'm assign Matt Point as my roommate or my suite mate. There will never be a time that that will be approved. And even if I come back to them and say, but Matt has known me since I was 3, he knows where my glucagon is. He knows that I like, this Level Life glucose gel versus the nerd clusters. He knows how to deal with my diabetes. We will say that is great that you have this best friend in Matt, but we cannot assign Matt as your accommodation under the ADA, because what will happen 100% of the time is once we get to college, and once we get into our great new experience, whenever we're away from our parents and we're living our best lives in college, Matt and I are going to have a fallout. And the last thing that he is going to want to do is going to be strapped to me with my Level Life glucose gel versus the gummy savers. He's going to want to go out and do his own thing. And I'm going to need to be able to come up with another plan for me to be able to address these highs and lows that I have. So again, thinking about that in terms of what are you going to ask for in terms of housing accommodations? Is it something that is necessary, reasonable, and appropriate? I had a student that came to me one time that told me that she needed to be assigned to a triple room in our residence hall, which is a gigantic room that might have 6 people that would normally be in it. But she needed to have that as a single person to be able to live in this giant palatial residence hall room, because she was going to be bringing a lot of diabetes supplies with her. And, sort of as a diabetes supply hoarder myself, I know how many diabetes supplies you're going to be taking to college. That does not feel necessary, reasonable, and appropriate, because you're going to bring a couple of boxes of pump sites. You're going to bring some extra insulin with your refrigerator. You're going to have, sort of the, alcohol swabs or that type of thing. So again, we want to make sure that when we're making this magic wish list and we're asking for things, that they are reasonable, because we don't want to get into a fight with the disability office. We want to make this smooth. We want to get everything approved, and we want to get your student back out doing whatever they want to do to be able to have their very best experience.
I'm going to answer a question that I actually saw pop in the chat. Somebody said that their school wouldn't allow for priority registration for the first term, but would after that. And why do we think that could be like that? So I worked at an art school, which had a lockstep program. And in the first year, all students took the exact same classes, and there were no choice in when they were offered. So priority registration wouldn't matter, because whether you registered the very first person, you were the very first last person in the entire school to register, you would have had the exact same schedule. Usually in a first year program, it could be like that. That would probably be most likely my guess, but you can ask them. But I would say that's most likely the case. It's going to be prescribed. As far as housing accommodations go, they are complicated. It is probably the most complicated part of an accommodation in college, because Lee's office could approve you for an accommodation and I could still not implement it. One of those reasons is because accommodations are not retroactive. So let's say housing agreements open in March. You decided that you were going to come to Drexel University in June. You filed for a disability accommodation in late July. Drexel's on the quarter system. They start in mid-September, and I got notification of your accommodation to be in a specific building close to the dining hall in late August. Well, that building's been full since June, and we will not move another student to accommodate you. So now you're going to get placed where I have space, and I will bump you to the top of the wait list to move into that space. That is where we often see hiccups, especially around housing and dining accommodations, is that rooms are already full, the building's already full, the dining plan's already sold out for, a specific program. We we don't have facilities available. So you might be accommodated in a certain way. You're like, Lee's like, yes, I approve this person to have a single because of X, Y, and Z. If we don't have any rooms available that would meet your single requirements, or, if you needed a private restroom for, you have another disability that you may need a private restroom, but there are none available, we wouldn't accommodate that until we had the space available. You might get bumped to the top of the list. So the reason I tell that to everyone is because once you make a decision, do everything as early as possible. Apply it. Submit for your accommodation, submit your housing agreement, make your deposit. Once you know where you're going to go, move through your steps really quickly because that's going to open you up for the most success and make sure that you have the most options available to you. It doesn't matter if Lee's office gives you every single accommodation that's available. If you didn't apply and made a late decision and all the classes that you'd want are full and the building you wanted to live in are full, there's not much we can do for you in that situation. So definitely apply early. One of the other pieces that comes up a lot around housing accommodations, as I talked about it a lot, is the singles. We'll talk about that later. We always get questions, and people ask our advice of whether we say yes, get a single, or no, don't get a single. Is we will not allow, Lee talked about it, people to be your accommodation. We in that same situation, staff are also not a medical accommodation. So resident assistants, RAs, like other students living on your floor who their job is to like call 911 or let you into your room when you're locked out. The on campus, the residential staff that are living on campus, the residential coordinators, those people, they are not an accommodation. So they're not going to come check your kid's blood sugar. They're not going to come, they're like, oh, Johnny's low. We're going to talk about this one here in a second. Hey, did you eat? Your mom, Lee, texted me and wanted to make sure that you ate your gummies because you didn't text her back. People will not be your accommodation. Additionally, we will not give access to your room to another student or person as a medical accommodation. So if you went to Lee's office, you're like, you know, we're going to live in Millennium Hall. It's all single, so we're good there. So I don't need to ask for my single, but I do need to get an extra copy of my room key made for my bestie, Matt, who is in this building, because he is going to come check on me because he follows my share and he's going to come check on me when I'm low at night. We would never approve that accommodation. We don't approve people as accommodations.
I'll
Um,
answer one more question real fast before we move on to that. There was a question that came in our chat that talked about, would it be helpful or harmful if sort of the academic accommodations matches the housing accommodation? And it truly does not matter. One of the things that I'll note is that, what I want to tell you is that there should never be a time when a college disability office sort of hands you the diabetes package, just like in the K through 12 world. It's fine if they want to say, well, this is what we do for the students with diabetes. And then you as a parent need to say that is fantastic. Or you as a young adult who is approaching the student disability office in your college environment, that is fantastic. But let me teach you about me and my diabetes. And here is my documentation. Because under the law, we have an obligation to do an individualized review of every single accommodation request that comes in. So if you feel like that what is most important to you is the housing accommodation and that you think that you can handle it in the classroom environment, then absolutely, you can be heavy on the documentation, heavy on the request for housing versus light in terms of the disability accommodations for the classroom. The door is always open. Should your medical condition change, should you need additional accommodations in the future, it never closes. A question that just came in, do the accommodations carry over year from year? Yes, they do. So once you register with the disability office, those accommodations are going to be in place for the entire time that you are a student at that institution. So that would mean if I came in as a freshman and I decided I was going to go all the way up and get my PhD, those accommodations would still be in place for that entire time that I am enrolled at that institution. But if 2 years into my accommodation plan and 2 years into my, purview when I'm there at the school, suddenly I develop celiac. Now I need to go back, re-enter that interactive process and be able to seek out additional accommodations to modify the meal plan.
on that same topic, though, the last institution where I worked full time and I still work on a contractual basis, we do require students to like check in with us every year. So, but it's an automated email that goes out and says, yes, I'm still planning to continue my studies at this school, and I do not request a meeting to update my, yes, I would like to, set a meeting to discuss my accommodations for the next academic year, or please go away, Matt. So those were the options that were given. But we did send that out to every student to make sure that they were actively engaged in the process. And we were pretty much just checking in to make sure that you didn't need anything additional or have any changes.
Especially with classroom accommodations, it's really important to know that the student sort of guides which professors we disclose, their accommodations to. So my example would be if I'm enrolled in 4 different classes and one of them is a dance class and I have a learning disability, and my accommodations are extended time on tests and exams, maybe in my dance class, I don't need to utilize that accommodation because maybe there are no exams in that class. We're just going in, we're dancing, and then my exam at the end is just going to be a performance-based exam. I don't need you to tell that dance instructor that I'm registered with the disability office and that I need those accommodations. So that's why every semester there's sort of this review process. There is this check-in for you to be able to come back and let the disability office know, yes, these are the classes that I'm registered for next semester. These are the ones that I want you to be able to notify my professors for, or I want you to generate the letters so I can go and notify the professors.
The last school that I was with, we only did student notification. So we would generate letters and provide them to students. That's part of that request process. And it was on the student to notify the professor. So they would walk up, say, "Hi, Professor Lee. My name is Matt. I have an accommodation from the Disability Access Office, and I want to give you this letter." It doesn't disclose what the disability is. It just says what they get through our office. So whether it's, stop the clock time, or, the ability to leave for restroom breaks, or whatever it may be, will be outlined in that letter, but we don't disclose, like, Matt has type 1 diabetes. So that's one of the questions I would ask when you're visiting schools is like, or open house is your great friend. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can meet the disability people in the disability office on the open house. They will definitely have a table and some sort of fair area that you'll walk through. And that's one of the questions I would ask, like, how do you do notifications? Does the office notify faculty? Is it on the students? Because I might accommodate you, give you a letter, and if you never delivered it to the faculty member, I would consider it that you didn't do it. And I'd be like, oh, it's not retroactive because you never told them, you never delivered the letter. Versus Lee's office might have notified the faculty directly on your behalf. So it's really up to the institution. So these are my two big points that I like to share with parents as the biggest hiccups or helpful areas that parents experience in my world, which is everything outside of the classroom. So dining, living, having fun, misbehaving, getting in trouble, breaking legs, throwing food, skiing down hills on a cafeteria tray, whatever it may be. The first one is FERPA. It is every parent's least favorite subject. It stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Think of this as the HIPAA of higher education. FERPA means that I, as an administrator, am not allowed to speak to you as a parent. And that point, at the point of matriculation in the school, that point may be different based on the school. So at one school I was at, it meant butts and seats on the first day classes. So I could talk to parents until butts and seats day. But at the last school I was at, 2 schools ago, they considered the date the deposit was made. So when you were an applicant or you were interested in the school, I could talk to you about all kinds of hypothetical situations. Like, yeah, if you were to do this, we could do X, Y, and Z. But once that deposit was paid, I could only talk to the students. One thing that comes up and trips people is they're like, well, my student is only 16 years old, they're a minor. And I'm gonna say, oh, well, actually FERPA covers them, regardless of age and regardless of your relationship to them. So the student could be your 16-year-old son, or they could be your 56-year-old spouse who's going back for a second degree, and I legally cannot talk to you. And then when you come back to me and you're like, Matt, I need you to tell me, I know she got in trouble. I know she has a meeting with you on Friday. I need to know what happened. I pay the bill, and I'm going to reply, that's so nice that you're providing that opportunity for your student. I need you to talk to them about it. FERPA is not applied equally across the institution. So for a good example of that would be financial aid and bills. So in most student portals, a student can log in and click a button that says, I give my parents permission or these people permission to see my bill, pay my bill, whatever it may be. So they click it and they just type your names in, and then you're good to go. They do that at your initial registration so that you can see their bill. But for things like housing or dining or conduct, so a student got in trouble, I required written consent, which was dated and provided a timeline and names of people I could speak to. So let's say Lee had too much to drink, and decided to take a softball bat and played softball in the hallway, and she broke an emergency exit sign with a soccer ball that she hit with a softball bat, and I caught it all on security camera because there's cameras in the hallway. I need Lee's written consent to speak to you about this situation if you found out about it. And they would say, Mr. Matt, I give you permission to speak to my mom, Donna Davis, about from this date to this date about XYZ situation. Please know that students can revoke that permission at any time. A good example of that is I met with a student about an alcohol incident. They gave permission for written consent in front of their parent because their parent was on campus. The police might have been there too, um, sitting across from me. They left. The mom was still sitting in the room, and my phone dinged. And the student messaged me that said I could no longer talk to her parent. And the student ran, like literally, like sprinted, like left. And I was like, "Oh, sorry, they revoked consent. I can't talk to you anymore." And the parent was shocked. And it's because it's the law, and the student could actually sue me as an administrator, not just the school. And like I was an education employee, I don't have any money, so I'm not going to talk to you. My job and my pug's not worth talking to you about your kid who had too much to drink. So we are not going to do that. And that goes for anything. And those permission FERPA waivers aren't universal. So just because somebody gives you permission to talk about bills doesn't mean you can talk about their schedule. And just because you can talk about their schedule doesn't mean you can ask about their grades. And just because you can ask about the housing accommodation doesn't mean you can ask about, hey, can you like run my daughter's swipe cards and see how many overnight guests she's been having? What's the name of the person who's been staying over in her room? Because I know she has to check them in every night. Without written consent from your student, I will not talk to you about anything relating to your student. The only time in which I can violate FERPA is in an emergency situation in which, like, we need to make a decision or we're making a medical notification. However, I still typically in those situations put it on the hospital or wherever it may be to let you know what's going on. In those situations, I might call and say, "Hi, it's 2:30 in the morning." I'm like, "Hi, this is Matt from Drexel University. How are you?" And they're like, confused. It's 2 in the morning. And I'm like, "There was a little incident. Lee has gone to the hospital. She is there. If you have any questions, please feel free to speak to the people at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital." And they're like, "What happened?" I'm like I said, talk to the people at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. Have a great night. Click. So FERPA, that's what it is. And it's every parent's worst nightmare, but you'll be fine. If you set up boundaries with your student, like talk about, open lines of communication, there's never any real reason to be concerned about FERPA. The only times we've ever really ran into issues is when parents and students had strained relationships. And, it was like, this was the first time they were speaking since October when they got dropped off in August. And now we were having this conversation about some behavior. The next one I want to point out is the Clery Act. As somebody who lived and worked in Philadelphia for a while, especially in West Philadelphia, I like to point this out. Every school is mandated to write this report. I authored 2 of them last year, and it is the Clery Act report includes the annual safety report and the annual fire safety report. So check this out because you can learn all kinds of things. You're like, "I heard Drexel's a really dangerous area in West Philadelphia. Like, I'm concerned about my student being there." But you look on campus, you're like, "Oh, well, like they had 3 of this happen on campus and 1 person in a food truck got robbed last year. Okay, so that's not as bad as I thought it might be." But the reason I want you to check out the Clery report is because it provides every emergency procedure and that will happen on campus. So in the event of a weather-related emergency, in the event that a student is transported to a hospital, you will see where your student will be taken. If your student were to need a mental health evaluation, you would see where we would take your student for those services. So I would highly encourage you to check out your school's Clery report because it will provide you with all kinds of factual information about local hospitals, clinics, emergency phone numbers, everything that you might need or want regarding that subject. It's also a great way. There's usually the emergency notification system is also built into that report. So if you want to see how you can get information about emergency notifications on campus, they're always in that report as well. So this is my favorite subject. So what if Johnny won't answer my call? Oh, we're going to have to speed this up, Lee. I'm watching on the Dexcom. He's not answering. What are you going to do? Should I call the RA? Should I call, should I like charter a helicopter? Should I come to campus? What's going on? I can't talk to you because of FERPA, remember? So you can call campus. And if you get to me, which hopefully you don't because I'm at home, the RA will probably get your call and they'll be like, "I don't know. I'll talk to you later. I'm a 18-year-old student. Bye." And they'll hang up. And the student will call me because I'm on call, and they'll be like, "Johnny's low, and his mom's concerned, and she wants us to go key into the room." And I'm gonna say, "Go knock on the door." And if they're there, be like, "Hey, Johnny, your mom wants you to call him." And then I'll call Johnny's mom back. So I call Johnny's mom, and I was like, We'll relay your message." And that is all the information that I'm gonna provide because I don't know if you're a creepy stalker. How will I know if you're not just like, some woman he met on the subway and, you just are looking for a date or whatever it may be. You just creepy stalker X. I'm not gonna even let you know if we ran into the student, and that's because it's for the student's safety and because of FERPA. I can't even tell you if I made contact with the student, but I will relay the message that we will let your student know that you're looking for them if we make contact. In the event of an emergency, I will notify you. So keep that in mind. I'm saying this, but if like there was an actual emergency, we would notify you. We would check. Usually in that situation, I would check swipes. I could check to see if the student had been in the building, had they been somewhere else on campus. There's a lot of different things we would do, but just keep it in mind.
One
Um,
thing I'll say about that, about Johnny. So I know you're worried about Johnny. I want to show you really quickly what I have on my phone. So I can show you the Johnnies that I follow on my Dexcom app. Um, so these are all of the Johnnies. One of those is my actual Johnny, who is at 341 going down, but the rest of them are our coworkers, and our other friends for life that have diabetes. So we are following them. So we understand what it means whenever you're worried about, what am I going to do at night? And that's what we want to tell you now. Now is the time. We're in April. Let's prepare now for going to college. How are we going to be able to deal with this? He's low at night. What am I going to be able to do about it? How he's not answering my phone. He's not answering my text messages. I'm going to put into the group chat a product that several of our diabetes colleagues are using. This is the Sugar Pixel Clock. They are convinced that this is sort of a nighttime lifesaver for them as young adults, as adults with diabetes, whenever they're on their own. That this clock is very helpful to them. I've had students and families who have said, I need to hardwire a phone into the residence hall room. Like there are no phones in residence hall rooms, but they need to get a phone line put in, because they need to be able to call their child at night. Well, that's not going to happen, likely. That is not necessary, reasonable, and appropriate for us to go and get a phone line put into your residence hall. So what are other things that we can do to be able to help alleviate your concerns and make sure that Johnny is safe at night? One of the recommendations that I would probably say is to try the Sugar Pixel. The alert changes, the tone changes each time whenever it sends you out an alert. And it seems to be waking people up. Get the clock and see whether that works. Test different things out between now and August whenever they get ready to go back to school. So that way you as a parent are able to have some sort of peace of mind. And then the student also is is able to wake up should they need to.
One thing that the student needs to do is to learn to speak and advocate for themselves. So every student on campus is willing to help. Every adult on campus, every employee will help your student. However, we can't legally mandate or ask them to do because the job of an RA and on-campus staff who are not medical providers or EMTs is to call 911 and hold doors open. So I need your student to like learn their elevator pitch. Hi, I am Lee Fickling. I have type 1 diabetes. In the event that I go low and this really loud alarm clock is going off, I have a glucagon. This is how it's used. It's Velcroed to the side of my bed here. Here's a laminated strip of paper that is also Velcroed below it with instructions. Here's an emergency phone number. And if they tell their roommate, and tell their friends, and tell their RA that most everybody is going to be willing to help, we just can't mandate it as on campus staff. So have a plan. One of the things I like to tell people about is I had a student who came from the state of Florida. Their health insurance did not work in the city of Philadelphia. They fell and broke their leg. They ended up in an emergency room and they had to have a follow-up appointment with an orthopedic. Well, emergency care is covered everywhere you are, but appointments are not. So I had a student with a broken leg who couldn't make an orthopedic appointment in the city of Philadelphia. I had to help her get onto a plane and fly home to Miami to go see somebody about her shattered leg, which she fell on the ice down a flight of stairs in the subway. So research your plan, check out your insurance plan before you go, and like see what's available for you. The reason I point that out is because maybe if your insurance requires you to go to CVS and there's no CVS within 40 miles of your school, how is your student going to get their medications or their supplies? Which leads me to my favorite topic, mail on campus. So let's say you get your supplies via the mail, your pump tubing shows up at the house and your infusion sets are at the house. You need to get them to campus. You are like, I'm going to overnight these to Lee because she's only got one infusion set left. On campus mail may not be overnight. So if it's like a central distribution center like Drexel, somebody received it on Friday. And on Friday afternoon, it got checked in. And on Friday afternoon, it got put into a bus. And then on Monday, when the mail people came back, somebody drove that bus around campus and dropped it off at your residence hall, where you then picked it up on Monday night after the notification came. So that overnight mail became 4 days. And actually, it was 5 because Monday was a holiday. So they didn't get the mail till Tuesday. So this is one of the things you need to ask about when you're on campus is like, how do students get mail? If we overnight something, how would they actually get it? What hours are they available to get it? Because I ran into situations where students were waiting on medical supplies in the past and they were like locked in a truck somewhere floating around in West Philadelphia. There's one great way an easy way to get around that. If you think your student's going to last at this school for a few years, you can get them a PO box near campus and then you can ship them and they would have access to anything at any time. So highly encourage you to consider getting your student a PO box or a UPS box near campus. Dining services aren't available 24/7. So if you're like, hey, I know I have to get up at 5 a.m. and do my run and then I eat immediately at 5:45, but on campus dining doesn't start till 7:30. Check this out. You got to make sure that your school is going to work in your routine. If diet and exercise are an important part of your routine, make sure the gym meets your equipment needs. Make sure the dining meets your dining preferences. Just because they can accommodate your gluten-free, nut-free, ice-free, water-free diet, but you don't like the food, you might not eat it. So make sure you taste it all, try it all, and make sure that the times and hours availability works for you. Good example is that I worked at a small art school. Monday through Friday, we offered breakfast, lunch, and dinner in 2-hour increments. On weekends, we only did brunch and dinner, which ran from 9 to 11:30 and then 5 to 7:30 on Saturday and Sunday. If you didn't come during those times, you didn't eat on campus. So something to think about. Lastly, we talked about it once at the beginning of this slide. I'm talking about it again. Share your diabetes story. I'd encourage you to go ahead and practice with your student and have them say in 60 seconds or less, tell them about diabetes. Like, hi, my name is Matt. I have type 1 diabetes. I wear an insulin pump. Sometimes I beep and I have a glucagon velcro to my bed. These are all the fun things you need to know. These are my Skittles. Please don't eat them. I have Reese's Cups for everyone else. The Skittles are medication. So whatever they can learn to say in 60 seconds to share their diabetes story with everyone around them. Campus tours, they're a really, 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 really important part of getting out there. So like I said, check out the dining options because if you're not going to like the food, it doesn't matter when it's available. If you go and you're like, okay, so I usually eat a healthy diet. I'm really low carb, and like they have like mostly frozen food and some like sad iceberg lettuce. Like maybe it's not going to work for you. Maybe Drexel's food ain't that great. You just never know. Just kidding. It was great. Check out the health center. Some student schools offer really great facilities, some don't. Good examples, I live near Penn State. They have a hospital. So, in the event that a student at Penn State goes to the hospital, they go to Penn State Health. But if you're a student in the city and like in Philly at Moore, I'm going to send you wherever is closest. So Thomas Jefferson, I called, they only have a 3-hour wait in the ER right now. Go there, great. So check it out, see what's available nearby. Check out the campus transportation options. So a good example of this would be Virginia Tech doesn't allow students to drive their first year of school. So if your students come to campus and they need to get to a pharmacy, they don't have a car, how are they going to get there? So look into these options. Is there a bus system? Is there public transit? Is there parking at all? Philadelphia, there was very limited parking for any students. We talked about the fitness facilities and the mail services. Check it out. Ask how long it takes to get mail once it arrives to campus. And not just mail, packages. How long does it take to get packages? Because they're usually processed separately at every school. I'm gonna let Lee take this one real quick.
So down here, I wish that I could show you. I'll try to show you. Down here, lumped up in the floor is my daughter's diabetes alert dog. His name is Batman. If you are planning to bring a service animal with you to college, I think one of the things that you need to be able to think about is, are there local regulations with regards to those animals in your college environment? So do you have to register with the local county in terms of having him registered as a service animal? Are there, do you have a local vet there? What if the dog gets sick? What if your child decides that they're going to do fraternity or sorority rush? And they want to go away for a big weekend? What is going to happen to the dog if they decide that they don't want to take the dog with them? What are sort of local regulations? What about the cost of food and the upkeep of the animal while you have them there? Under the ADA, service animals do not have to be registered with an office. They are able to accompany your child on campus without any sort of registration, or with, just the two questions that we can ask: is that a service animal, and what is the task that they have been trained to do? What I would tell you to do as a service animal owner and as sort of your diabetes mom and a disability office professional is register that animal with the disability office. So again, it's not required by law, but if a tree falls on a residence hall, and we have to respond sort of in an emergency management perspective from a higher education perspective, I want to know, who are the students with disabilities in that residence hall, and are there any service animals in there, to make sure that I can relay that information to our first responders so they know Batman, the service animal, is still in there. We need to make sure that he is vacated from the premises as well. And the last thing that I'll talk about very, very quickly, in about 2 minutes or 1 minute or less, is that, you have gone through an interactive process when you were in the K through 12 environment in terms of seeking accommodations in that primary school, secondary school, and high school situation. You're going to go through another reasonable accommodation for your college classes, and whether that's a housing accommodation, dining accommodation, externship, internship, whatever. There may be a different type of accommodation process whenever we're thinking about outside of the classroom. So whether that's a clinical rotation, an internship, maybe an interview for a work study position on campus, you may have to go through a different reasonable accommodation with those different types of environments that may look very much like employment related accommodations. The standard for review for employment related accommodations is very different from a college-based classroom or housing accommodation. So again, you may have had a yes to all of your accommodation requests whenever you were thinking about the classroom environment, sort of your traditional first 4 years of college. But as soon as you get ready to do that clinical rotation with your health science program, or you're in the nursing school, or you're going to get ready to go to med school, that accommodation conversation may restart, and you may have to re-engage with the office. You may have to provide additional documentation to be able to go through that. You may have different questions about, when do you disclose the disability? Do you need to disclose the disability? And those are all things that you really need to sort of think through in terms of, what is your experience going to be like at that environment? How will you be able to manage the diabetes? And what does it look like to have a level playing field?
And that's it. I know we rolled through a lot of information, but
And I've put our email addresses into the chat. I also put our conference at childrenwithdiabetes.com email address if you have questions about our Friends for Life conference that's taking place this summer in July, like Matt talked about as well. And I think we have 2 minutes if there's anybody else that might have a question that wants to pop it into the chat. Don't be shy.
Lee, I kind of have a question regarding what you said about service animals. When it comes to living on campus with a service animal, does the not having to disclose that still stand, or because they're trying to live on campus with a service animal, do they have to?
Yeah, I think you need to, especially if you're living on campus, I think you absolutely need to disclose that, because a lot of times, when housing offices get ready to do their housing accommodation process and their room assignment process, it's like Jenga. Whenever we think about like the mixing and the matching. So we're not only dealing with students that have service animals, we're also dealing with students that have emotional support animals as well. So you want to make sure that you disclose that early on, just so that way they can make sure, like if Batman hates cats and every time he sees a cat, he hisses, even though, he's supposed to be working and dealing with Ava's diabetes, we would want to make sure sort of at the college accommodation process, whenever we're doing those housing accommodations, that we don't put Batman in a room with an emotional support cat that happens to be at the same time. So I think that, it's really important for you to be able to disclose, again, from an emergency management perspective, from a safety perspective. We want to make sure that anybody that's bringing a service animal sort of is prepared for that, and the school is able to be prepared for that too. I've known some colleges and universities, when a student gets ready to register with a service animal, like they have a little doggy bandana, that says welcome to whatever, and like they sort of crown them with a bandana to be able to welcome them into sort of the student disability environment and the doggy disability environment as well. So, I think if we can give you anything to let you know, sort of as we leave here tonight, be assured that you have the right to be able to register with the disability office. It doesn't have to be hard. Use the knowledge that we've given you tonight with the sword rather than with a shield, and reach back out to us if you have any questions.
Quick question. We're going back to that Cleary report. Who would be the appropriate person at a university that we would ask for that report?
So it's publicly accessible on the website. So if you just go on any university's website and the search and type Cleary, they'll have the last 3 years worth of data. So it'll be one report on there. Like, I'm meticulous in like deleting all the old reports, so we don't have any outdated information. But the report itself contains the last 3 years, academic years worth of data, or calendar years worth of data. It's very difficult because it goes by calendar year and not school year. So I'm like, yes, this did happen in last school year, but it is in this year's report.
Great, thank you.
But it's a great resource, especially if you want to look especially if you're students looking to go to school like out of state or somewhere you don't know, or you've never lived, or I don't know, like what hospital would he go to, or what pharmacies are available, or I know that my kid has X, Y, and Z condition and they see a physical therapist monthly. Like, there might be resources for that in the Clear report for sure.
And then one last question. I know you kind of addressed like your child's blood sugar is low, they're not answering their call. At what point, like, I know that legally the RA can't, but at some point then if it's 40 and double down and I can't get hold of my child, like, then what do you do in that situation? Because I know of children who have died in college because of that. So what's the best thing to do then?
So
Do I call campus
realistically,
police?
yes. I would say there's always somebody you can contact in the event of an emergency. What we tell you as a response may not necessarily match the actions of what's going on behind the scenes. So just because I'm like, thank you for your note, thank you for your call, we will relay the message, doesn't mean that I didn't have a student go knock who talked to your groggy student who's like, oh, I've been asleep, I've been taking a nap, I'll call my mom. Or in the event of, I used to look up student swipes all the time. Like, parents would call and be like, oh, my student, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, they're in the dining hall. They just swiped in 10 minutes ago. She's just ignoring you. But we'll relay the message. Usually we will do our due diligence and look into it, especially if a parent's concerned. But I would encourage you to call campus police. If you are seriously concerned about a medical emergency, call campus police. If your school doesn't have campus police, there will be some sort of something you can call. You can call 911 for the city. I had a parent call 911 for a city. They were concerned about their student missing. Turned out their student was living in a fraternity house at Temple University, but they called the city of Philadelphia Police Department for a missing student who wasn't missing. But the police actually contacted me directly at home in the middle of the night to help find the missing student. So I would definitely, make a plan. That's also why you need to have a plan and discuss with your student before you get there. So if you're like, hey, let's have a messaging system. So if you go below 60 ever and you've treated, you need to send me like 3 banana emojis, and that will be my note that and you're aware and you've done something about it, and I will not contact you again.
Yeah. And I have those systems here. It's just one of those obviously worries as a parent. So
I told one parent to stop following her kid on Share because they were 6 hours away and there was nothing she could do anyways.
Will not That's what Matt says, but I will say, as a diabetes mom, will not stop until my child shuts the share off. And, then I think like we've tried to say, what we want to encourage you to do is to spend the time now, between now and August, to be able to create this plan. My husband was a campus police officer for 14 years, and they are absolutely equipped to be able to go and do this. Whenever you think I want to rely on the RA, I want you to keep in mind that those RAs are students. They are fellow students, just like your student. They're not trained to do glucagons. They're not trained necessarily to do emergency response. What they're trained to do is call 911. So, again, the time is now for us to be able to think about what are our plans, safety precautions in. I absolutely hear what you're saying. I said this, I will always say this, that my biggest fear is what will happen to my child overnight. I worry since the day she was diagnosed until very much today that she will die overnight. I can fix a high all day long. I can fix a high at school. I can tell you to give insulin. I can tell you to drink water or go exercise, but my biggest fear is what happens overnight. And so now is the time for us as parents to be able to sort of equip ourselves with our kids to come up with this plan. And then we just have to trust that everything is going to be okay once they get there.
And then have that elevator speech, because if they've had this conversation with their roommate saying, hey, I have
Yeah.
diabetes, I'm going to beep, which leads me to Lee and I encourage you not to allow your student to seek a single. But we'll leave it at that,
Right.
so that your students don't come for us.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions?
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you again to Lee and Matt for putting on this awesome, very educational presentation, and partnering with us for this event. As many of you probably already know, we have a variety of other events going on across the summer, including another accommodations related session in August. So feel free, if you haven't already, sign up and join us for that. And again, feel free to reach out to Matt and Lee or to myself, or the Diabetes Link in general with any questions, and we will make sure to point you in the right direction or get you the information that you need.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys for being here.